Ethan, 68, a retired diner owner, is in his kitchen when his son Kyle, 35, and daughter-in-law Megan slam down papers for a reverse mortgage and care home consent. Ethan refuses to sign, so Kyle hits him and declares, "Now I'm the boss." Megan films, threatening to edit the clip and use it to have Ethan declared incompetent and shipped to a cheap care facility. Ethan pretends to be broken and too shaky to sign, buys time until breakfast, gets locked in his bedroom, and then reveals he has a hidden key and is not nearly as helpless as they assume. My son slapped me so hard my teeth cut into my lip. Then he leaned over me so close I could smell last night's whiskey on his breath and said 5 words I will never forget. Now I'm the boss, old man. If you've never had your own child strike you, I hope you never do. It doesn't feel real at first. My cheeks stung, my ears rang, but mostly there was this hollow space in my chest where something used to be. The same boy I'd bounced on my knee in this very kitchen was standing over me, like I was a stranger who had wandered into his bar tab. I was on my knees on the tile I'd picked with my wife Lena 30 years ago, watching a thin ribbon of my blood slide toward the cabinet. Behind him, Megan was framed in the doorway in her silk robe, arm outstretched, phone already recording, red light blinking like an accusation. "Good," she said calmly. "We got that." A few minutes earlier I had been sitting at the table with my coffee and the morning paper like always. The house was quiet. I just finished the crossword. Then the front door banged, and Kyle came storming in like a cop in a movie, a fat yellow envelope in his hand. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I slept. He just dropped the envelope so hard it rattled my cup. "Sign it," he snapped. The top page slid out far enough for me to see the bold letters "Vars Morgiement." Underneath that, in smaller print, something about long-term care authorization. "What's this?" I asked. "You know what it is," he said. "You've been dragging your feet. Darren drew everything up. This pays off what I owe and gets you into a place where they actually know how to look after you." Darren was some slick advisor he'd met online. I'd never liked the way the man talked to me on speakerphone, like I was a problem to be solved. I picked the paper up. My eyes aren't what they were, but I can still read a contract. It said the bank would put a lion on my fully paid house. Money would go into an account Kyle could manage on my behalf. There was a line about placement at Meadowbrook Senior Living and consent to relocation. I set it back down. "No," I said. He stared at me. "No." I took a slow sip of coffee to steady my hand. "I'm not signing my house over to fix whatever mess you've gotten yourself into, and I'm not letting a stranger decide where I die." His jaw clenched. "You are unbelievable." Megan stepped into the room, phone up like a reporter. "He's being difficult again?" she asked. He said no. Kyle spat. She tilted her head, looking at me the way you look at a misbehaving dog. "Ethan, be reasonable. You fall. You forget things. You left the back door open last week. We can't just leave you rattling around in here." "I left it open because you were bringing in groceries," I said. "And I'm the one who closed it after you left the trunk open." Kyle's eyes flashed. "You're old?" he hissed. "You don't see it, but everybody else does. You repeat yourself. You stare at the TV without hearing it. You nearly burned the kitchen last month." "I spilled some grease," I said. "I cleaned it up." "Nothing burned." He slammed his palm on the table so hard my cup jumped. "You are going to sign this," he shouted. "I'm not letting you wreck what's left because your pride can't handle help." "Help doesn't come with your name on my deed," I answered. For a second I thought he might throw the papers. Instead, his hand came at my face. The back of it connected with my cheekbone with a crack that seemed to freeze the room. My head whipped sideways. The chair leg caught my calf, and the floor rose up at me. The world narrowed to a white burst and the metallic taste of blood. Behind him, Megan's voice floated, cool as ice water. "Keep rolling," she murmured to herself. "This is perfect." I heard my own breath rasping as I pushed myself up on one elbow. My hand found my pocket, the familiar square of my old handkerchief. I pressed it to my lip, the cloth came away red. "Look at him," Megan said, angling the phone so she got my face full on. "Unstable." Tried to lunge. Lost his balance. "The judge is going to love this." Kyle towered over me, chest heaving. For a flicker of a second, I saw fear in his eyes, like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Then he glanced at Megan, saw the phone, and something mean settled there instead. "You see what you made me do," he said. "You could have just signed." "I'm not confused, Kyle," I managed. "I'm your father. You're a liability," he snapped. "And I'm done letting you drag us down." Megan stepped closer. The camera was inches from my face now. "Here's what happens," she said, her voice low and patient like she was explaining a recipe. "We can take this video, trim out the parts we don't need, and show a judge an old man who can't control himself. He'll give Kyle emergency guardianship, maybe even have you placed right away. Or," she let the word hang over me, "or you sign these," Kyle finished, nudging the envelope toward me with his foot. "You go to a place where they'll spoon applesauce into you, and I make sure the loans get paid. You don't want some court-appointed stranger in charge of you, do you?" I wiped my lip again. The sting woke something up in me that had been asleep a long time. I thought about the nights I'd worked the grill until my shirt stuck to my back. I thought about walking home with Grace on my boots and coins in my pocket, telling myself it was all for the boy. I thought about Lena laughing, telling me not to spoil him. "Bring me the pen," I whispered. Kyle's face brightened with an ugly kind of relief. He snatched the pen from Megan's hand and dropped the packet next to me on the floor. "Right there," he said, jabbing at the signature line with his finger. "You sign. We handle everything. You can go lie down. No more worrying." I took the pen. Let my fingers tremble. Let my breath come short and ragged. I hovered the point just above the paper, close enough they thought I was trying. I can't," I wheezed. "Look at my hand. If I sign like this, the bank will know something's wrong. Signature won't match. They'll send it back. They'll ask questions." "You don't want that? Just sign it," he yelled. The pen slipped from my grasp, clattering to the tile, rolling under the chair. "Let me sleep," I said, making my voice small. "My hand will be better in the morning. I'll sign it at breakfast. I promise." Megan's eyes narrowed. You could almost hear her counting risks. "He's right," she said finally. "If the signature looks messy, some clerk might flag it. Let him stew. He's not going anywhere. We have his phone. I already pulled the wall jack from his room." Kyle cursed under his breath, then grabbed my arm, hauling me up like I weighed nothing. "7 a.m., Dad," he said, dragging me down the hallway. "We eat. You sign, then the nice van comes to take you to your new home. You fight me well. You saw what that looks like." He shoved me into my bedroom and locked the door. I heard the click of the key, his footsteps thudding back down the hall, Megan's laugh mixing with the sound of the television. For a moment, I stood there in the dark, listening to the hum of the old heater, the creak of the house settling on its bones. My cheek burned. My lip throbbed. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Then the pounding slowed and something else settled in its place. I walked to the closet and pushed aside Lena's dresses, still hanging there 3 years after she'd gone. My fingers traced the rough edge of the back shelf until they found what they were looking for, a little strip of tape. I peeled it back and a small brass key dropped into my palm. Kyle thought locking me in my own room made him the boss. He forgot whose hands hung that door and what else those hands had hidden in this house. That's what I was thinking as I stood alone in my locked bedroom, turning that little brass key over in my hand. The house was quiet again. Somewhere down the hall the television mumbled to itself, and I could hear Kyle laughing at something Megan said. They thought the night's work was done. I slid the key into the lock and felt the old mechanism give with a soft click. I eased the door open just enough to stick my head out. The hallway was empty, a ribbon of yellow light from the living room stretching toward me. No shadows moving. No voices close. I stepped out, shut the door behind me, and gently turned the knob until it wouldn't move. As I stood there, I put my hand on the same door jamb I'd leaned against 1,000 times, waiting for Lena to finish brushing her hair. It still had the little dent where Kyle had crashed his toy truck into it, age 4, shrieking with laughter. That was back when he thought I was 10 feet tall and could fix anything with a kiss and a Band-Aid. Back before money and easy credit put other ideas in his head. I padded down the hall in my socks, slow and careful, and my mind wandered backward on its own, like someone had hit rewind. I saw myself at 25, standing outside a peeling building at the edge of Route 7 with a set of keys in my hand and Grace already under my fingernails. The sign above the door read, "Charlie's Eats." But Charlie had been dead 6 months, and the place smelled like old oil and broken promises. Lena stood beside me in her thrift store coat, cheeks pink from the wind, eyes bright. "This place may be small, Ethan," she'd said, looping her arm through mine, "but it's ours. When our legs give out, at least the roof won't." We scrubbed that place until our hands cracked. We painted over the nicotine-stained walls, replaced the busted booth cushions with ones I found at an auction. By the time Kyle was born, the regulars had started calling it Grant's Diner. Whether I liked it or not, I can still see him, chubby legs kicking under the corner booth, crayons scattered over Kid's Menace, crumbs on his bib. On slow afternoons, Lena would pour him a little cup of milk and sneak him a slice of pie that hadn't sold. "Don't spoil him," I'd grumble, flipping burgers at the grill. She'd laugh, that big, ringing laugh that used to make even the grumpiest truckers smile. "What's the point of owning the pie if your boy never tastes it?" she'd say. Double shifts, burned arms, grease in every crease of my skin. That's what those years were. I came home smelling like onions and sweat, but I came home to a tiny house that was slowly, stubbornly becoming ours. Then one Tuesday morning, Lena dropped a coffee pot. She was fine 1 second, arguing with the bread guy about the price of buns. And the next she was on the floor, eyes rolled back, her hand twitching like it was trying to grab something that wasn't there. I yelled for someone to call an ambulance. But by the time the paramedics wheeled her out, I knew. The doctor said, "Massive stroke." And nothing anyone could have done. I heard, "Lone with a boy in a diner I can't close because we're 2 months behind on the power." So I kept the place going. Not because I loved it anymore, but because switching off the neon sign felt like betraying her somehow. Kyle was 12. I didn't want to rip his feet out from under him as well. Those were the hardest years. Just me and the grill and a kid who was starting to look bored whenever I talked about hard work. He liked the perks. The pancake breakfasts, the free sodas, the way the regulars slipped him dollar bills to bust their tables. But I saw something else creeping in behind his eyes, a belief that the money showed up because we deserved it, not because Lena and I had sweated for it. Even then there were signs. "Dad, can I borrow 20? Turned into, "Put it on the business account." When I started seeing my cigarettes on his breath, I yelled. He sulked. When I caught a 50 missing from the register, he swore he'd pay it back when the team wins. I paid the overdue notice on the light bill instead. I finally sold the diner when I was 62. My back hurt every time I bent, and the grace in the air seemed to seep into my lungs. A young couple from the city bought the place and turned it into some kind of bistro. They kept my griddle, though. I like to think it still remembers my hands. After I paid off what we still owed and the taxes took their bite, there was just enough left to finish paying this house and put about $200,000 into safe little piles CDs at the credit union, a plain IRA, nothing fancy. It wasn't the kind of money that makes magazines, but it was security. A roof, a cushion. A promise to Lena I'd finally kept. That's when the loans started. "Dad, I'm this close to getting a route of my own. Just need a down payment on a better truck. Dad, Megan's ring maxed my card. Can you float me till bonus time?" I told myself it was temporary. Everybody struggles starting out. I wrote the checks, signed the withdrawals. Every time I made him swear it was the last, and every time he swore on his mother's grave he'd make me proud. The first time I said no, really no, I remember it like another slap. He'd brought home a glossy brochure for a massive pickup with tires up to my chest. "They'll finance most of it," he said, waving the paper. "I just need you to co-sign. It'll help my credit." "You don't need a truck that big," I said. "You deliver furniture, not tanks. Drive the one you have until it dies. Then we'll talk about what you can afford." He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "You're so old school, it's embarrassing," he muttered. "Everybody uses credit now. You sitting on a paid-off house and scared of a signature like some useless old man." The word hit me in the gut. Useless. I laughed it off at the time, told him he'd thank me later. But a seed had been planted. In the dim hallway that night, I stopped beside the family pictures. Lena's smile had faded behind the dusty glass, but the way she leaned into me, hand on baby Kyle's back, still made my throat tight. There was Kyle at 8 with ice cream on his chin. Kyle at 16 in a too-big suit for Lena's funeral. Kyle at 25, holding a beer at the diner's farewell party, eyes already scanning the crowd for someone more interesting than his father. Now there was this house. 1,200 square feet of siding and shingles. An old furnace, a tired kitchen, 2 bedrooms with sagging carpets. It wasn't much, but it was everything I had left that couldn't vanish with a bad bet, and that, I finally understood, made it a target. To Kyle, it wasn't home. It was numbers on a page. Equity. Collateral. The last chip on the table. I ran my fingers along the wall, feeling the bumps where I'd patched nail holes, the groove from when Lena had scraped a chair too hard. I'd spent my whole life worrying about keeping this place standing so he'd never have to. Maybe that was my mistake. I worked the grill so he wouldn't have to. I murmured to Lena's photo. Maybe that's where we went wrong. At the end of the hall, a thin strip of light shone from under the door of the little spare room Kyle called his office. Beyond that door were his papers, his bills, his secrets. And, if I was lucky, the proof I needed. I took a breath, hearing again the voice of an old regular, Officer Frank, sitting at the corner stool with a slice of apple pie. "If trouble ever comes from outside, call 911, he'd said. "If it comes from inside your own house, old man, you call me first." "Frank," I whispered, my hand on the doorknob. "I think your tab's coming due." I turned the handle and opened the office door. Kyle always called it his office, but when I pushed the door open a few inches and slid inside, it looked more like the back room of a losing betting shop. The glow from the computer monitor painted everything in sickly blue. Empty beer cans lay on their sides under the little desk, some crushed flat, some with cigarette butts floating in the warm backwash. Fast food bags sagged open on the floor, the sour smell of old onions mixing with the faint plastic scent of new electronics. This was where my son came to be important without anyone watching. I closed the door softly behind me, leaving only the monitor and a thin line of light from the hallway to see by. My cheek throbbed with every heartbeat. I ignored it. Pain didn't matter now. Information did. On the desk sat the laptop he was so proud of. The lid was already open, the screen glowing with a paused video, some talking head on a sports channel. A green notification bubble blinked in the corner. New message from Rex. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I've never been what you'd call a computer man. Most of my life, logging in meant signing a paper ledger at the end of a night shift. But I've watched Kyle tap at this thing enough to know the basics. The screen wanted a password. I snorted under my breath. "All right, Mr. Boss," I murmured. "Let's see how clever you really are." I thought about what mattered to him. His favorite football team. His jersey. The only time I'd seen him genuinely excited in the last few years was when that team finally made the playoffs. I typed the team name and his birth year, all one word, like I'd seen printed on the back of some fan shirt. The field shook once, then the desktop bloomed into view. "Of course," I whispered. "Same kid who used Kai123 on the diner Wi-Fi for 10 years. Email notifications stacked along the side of the screen like unpaid bills. I clicked the icon. His inbox opened, full of bold subject lines that made my stomach knot. Final reminder. Urgent action required. Settlement offer. I sorted by sender and my eyes went straight to one named Darren. I clicked the most recent thread. Darren had the kind of email style I'd seen from sales reps my whole life, too many exclamation points and no last name. "Good news, Kyle!" The top message began. "I've prepped the reverse mortgage packet exactly like we discussed. Once the old man signs, you're liquid by next week. House is collateral. Easy. Remember, seniors get spooked if you talk too much about debt. Stick to safety and care. Let me know when the ink's dry and I'll push it through." I scrolled down. Earlier messages showed Kyle whining about pressure from someone named Rex and Darren assuring him this was the cleanest way out, because Dad won't know what's happening anyway. My hand tightened on the mouse. I clicked on the search bar and typed, "Rex." A new set of messages appeared, these not nearly as polished. "Time's up, genius. One raid. I don't care if crypto went down. 50K is 50K. I'm done listening to excuses about market dips. I want cash. You got a week, then we start collecting in pieces. Fingers, kneecaps, whatever fits. Another one, from yesterday, last warning. Pay something by Friday. Or we come have a friendly chat at your old man's place. Might be easier to make him understand the stakes. I leaned back in the chair, my jaw clenched. My son hadn't just fallen behind on a car payment. He'd crawled into bed with the kind of people I used to throw out of the diner at closing time. You didn't just fall in with bad company, son, I whispered. You invited them for coffee in my kitchen. There were more. Draft emails to someone at Meadowview Senior Residence, never quite sent but saved in a folder. I opened one and read my own life reduced to a few cold lines. Patient is confused and unsafe, Kyle had typed. Leaves stove on. Has become verbally abusive, doesn't recognize family at times. Requesting expedited admission for his safety. Financials will be covered by reverse mortgage currently in process with my advisor. Confused and unsafe. That's what he'd told strangers about the man who taught him to ride a bike in the parking lot behind the diner. My mouth tasted like metal again, and this time it wasn't from the blood. I closed the draft and looked around the little room, trying to steady myself. On a shelf above the desk was the old tablet Kyle used to watch games on. The thing had gathered dust since he bought the newer laptop, but I knew it still worked. An idea came, simple and clean. I picked it up and pressed the power button. It blinked awake. His account was still logged in, he'd never bothered to log out. I opened the email app and, working slowly so my old fingers didn't slip, forwarded Darren's thread Rex's threats, and the Meadowview drafts to an address I hadn't touched in years. It was an old email I'd made when the diner first got a website, under a silly nickname Kyle had picked for me. Grillking. Hardly anyone knew it existed. Certainly not him. I typed the address carefully, double-checked it the way I used to check meat temperatures, and hit send. Little arrows spun for a second, then disappeared. Copies out of his reach. Still, printed paper feels more real to me than pixels. I slid open the desk drawer. There was a ream of paper and, thank God, a printer cable already plugged in. I printed the worst of it. The email where Darren said, "We get the old man to sign your liquid." The message where Rex threatened to come to my house, and the Meadowview draft describing me like I was a rabid dog. The printer sounded deafening in the small room. Each sheet that slid out felt like evidence in a trial I'd never imagined being part of. I folded the pages and tucked them inside the pocket of my robe, smoothing the fabric down over the bulge. As I closed the drawer, something on the screen caught my eye, a little icon labeled, Home Secure. I frowned. Kyle had bragged a few months back about installing cameras round the place. I'd nodded, thinking of porch pirates and bored teenagers egging houses. I hadn't realized he meant inside too. I double-clicked the icon. A small window popped up with a list of cameras: front door, driveway, living room. I clicked living room. There I was on the screen, a few minutes younger, sitting with my coffee at the table. The picture jumped as Kyle came into frame, envelope in hand. I watched the whole scene again from the ceiling's point of view, the argument, the flash of his arm, my body crumpling to the floor. Megan stepped in, phone up, mouth already forming the narrative. Only this angle didn't care about her story. It just showed what happened. At the bottom of the window, there was a button that said, Download clip. My hand hovered over the mouse, then pressed. The file landed in a folder. I opened the tablet's browser, attached the clip to an email addressed to that old Grillkinjit account, and sent it off into the ether. If Kyle wanted to play editor for the courts, I had just secured myself the director's cut. I shut the program down and dimmed the screen until the room went almost dark. That's when I heard a soft creak in the hallway, the unmistakable complaint of the third floorboard outside the bathroom. I'd spent 20 years telling Lena to remind me to fix it. Now I was grateful I never had. Someone was awake. I closed the laptop with slow, careful hands, the way you lower a full pan of hot oil. The room went black except for the line of light at the bottom of the door. I moved to it and pressed my ear against the wood. Footsteps. Light ones. Megan's. Her shadow slid past the crack, then stopped. The doorknob rattled once. I held my breath. She tried it again. Locked thanks to Kyle's own precautions. I heard her exhale, a little huff of satisfaction. Still sleeping, she whispered to herself. Good. Her steps moved on toward my bedroom. I tensed. The knob turned there too, then stopped. Another satisfied sigh, then the faint sound of a faucet in the kitchen. I slipped out of Kyle's office, closing the door as gently as I'd opened it. Pressing my back to the hallway wall, I waited until she padded back past me, the smell of her floral night cream drifting in the dark. She never turned her head. She checked the front lock, then disappeared into the master bedroom she shared with my son. The door clicked shut. Silence settled again. She was sure I was trapped. Good. Let's keep it that way for one more night. Kyle always called it his office. But when I pushed the door open a few inches and slid inside, it looked more like the back room of a losing betting shop. The glow from the computer monitor painted everything in sickly blue. Empty beer cans lay on their sides under the little desk, some crushed flat, some with cigarette butts floating in the warm backwash. Fast food bags sagged open on the floor, the sour smell of old onions mixing with the faint plastic scent of new electronics. This was where my son came to be important without anyone watching. I closed the door softly behind me, leaving only the monitor and a thin line of light from the hallway to see by. My cheek throbbed with every heartbeat. I ignored it. Pain didn't matter now. Information did. On the desk sat the laptop he was so proud of. The lid was already open, the screen glowing with a paused video. Some talking head on a sports channel. A green notification bubble blinked in the corner. New message from Rex. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I've never been what you'd call a computer man. Most of my life, logging in meant signing a paper ledger at the end of a night shift. But I've watched Kyle tap at this thing enough to know the basics. The screen wanted a password. I snorted under my breath. All right, Mr. Boss, I murmured. Let's see how clever you really are. I thought about what mattered to him. His favorite football team. His jersey. The only time I'd seen him genuinely excited in the last few years was when that team finally made the playoffs. I typed the team name and his birth year, all one word, like I'd seen printed on the back of some fan shirt. The field shook once, then the desktop bloomed into view. Of course, I whispered. Same kid who used Kyle 123 on the diner Wi-Fi for 10 years. Email notifications stacked along the side of the screen like unpaid bills. I clicked the icon. His inbox opened, full of bold subject lines that made my stomach knot. Final reminder. Urgent action required. Settlement offer. I sorted by sender and my eyes went straight to one named Darren. I clicked the most recent thread. Darren had the kind of email style I'd seen from sales reps my whole life, too many exclamation points and no last name. Good news, Kyle! The top message began. I've prepped the reverse mortgage packet exactly like we discussed. Once the old man signs, you're liquid by next week. House is collateral. Easy. Remember, seniors get spooked if you talk too much about debt. Stick to safety and care. Let me know when the ink's dry and I'll push it through. The cruelest prison isn't four walls. It's a story someone tells about you while you're still breathing. By the time the sun started turning the curtains gray instead of black, I'd managed to lie down for maybe an hour with my eyes closed. I didn't sleep. I was listening. Houses talk if you've lived in them long enough. They creak when weight shifts, they sigh when doors open. Around 6, I heard Kyle's door slam, then the heavy shuffle of his feet down the hall. The lock on my bedroom door rattled. I slid the little brass key I'd used back into its hiding place on the shelf and moved away from the handle just as it turned. The door opened and there he was, silhouetted against the hall light, hair sticking up, eyes puffy. Rough night. Huh, Dad, he said in a tone that was supposed to sound concerned. It just sounded tired and mean. I've had better, I answered. He looked at my cheek, now a dark purple bloom spreading toward my ear, then quickly away. You fell pretty hard, he muttered. Come on. Megan made coffee. Let's all calm down and talk like adults. I almost laughed at that. Last night, his hand had been the only thing talking. I followed him down the hall, shuffling a little more than I needed to, leaning on the wall here and there. Let him see what he wanted to see. The kitchen was bright, sun already pouring across the table. Megan stood at the counter in leggings and a clean blouse, hair brushed, makeup on like she'd been up for hours. The pot burbled and the smell of coffee wrapped around me, bitter and familiar. Morning, Ethan, she said, plastering on a smile. Come sit. I poured you decaf. Safer. She set a mug in front of me carefully, like she was handling something fragile. For show, she waved the orange sugar packet away. He got so wired yesterday, she said to Kyle. We don't want him agitated when we talk to Meadowview. The words slid into the room like a draft. I lowered myself into my usual chair, wincing as if my joints hurt more than they did. My hands went flat on the table, palms down. I could feel the grain of the wood under my fingertips, 1,000 meals etched into it. Kyle sat across from me with his own mug, full strength by the smell. He cleared his throat. Dad, he began. About yesterday we all lost our tempers. But we can't ignore reality. Things have to change. Megan nodded, pulling her phone out. We have the call scheduled for 6:30, she said. The admissions coordinator at Meadowview. They need to finalize a few things before this afternoon. This afternoon, I repeated, letting confusion stretch the syllables. She gave me a pitying look. We've talked about this, Ethan. Remember, they have a lovely room for you. Activities. Nurses on site. It's safer than you rattling around here alone. I remembered. Mostly I remembered how I'd said no every time. She put her phone on the table and tapped the speaker icon. It rang twice, then a bright, professional voice filled my kitchen. Meadowview Senior Residence, this is Carla in admissions. Is this Megan? Yes. Hey, Megan gushed. Thanks for taking our call so early. My husband and I are here with his father, Ethan Grant. He's the patient we spoke about yesterday. We just want to make sure everything's in place before the transport this afternoon. Of course, Carla said. We have Mr. Grant's file right here. How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Grant? I looked at the little black rectangle on the table. For a second I thought about saying, betrayed. But I let my eyes go a little glassy instead. I'm tired, I said softly. Who is this again? Megan jumped in before Carla could answer. See? She said, voice tight. He's a little foggy like we mentioned. Yesterday he tried to go out in his slippers. He thought my car was a taxi. That must be very stressful for you. Carla cooed through the speaker. You're doing the right thing seeking support. I sipped the decaf. It tasted like cardboard. I set the cup down carefully, making sure my hand shook just enough to clink porcelain on wood. So the room is ready? Kyle asked, all business now. We were told there's a spot in the secure wing. Yes, Carla replied. We've reserved a bed for Mr. Grant in our assisted memory unit. The paperwork your advisor faxed over looks in order. We're just waiting on the executed power of attorney to place in his chart. And the transport? Megan asked. My husband has a lot to handle today. It would be easier if professionals did the moving. Our transport van will arrive at your address at 4 p.m., Carla said. We do recommend that family give the resident a mild sedative about an hour before pickup, just something prescribed by his primary doctor to reduce anxiety. It makes the transition smoother for everyone. Sedative, transition. Words said gently, like blankets being tucked in. Once the power of attorney is in place, Carla continued, we can proceed with transport even if he's a bit resistant. Guardianship gives you that authority. Have you been able to get him to sign yet? Megan made a show of sighing, loud enough for the phone. Not yet, she said. He had an episode yesterday. He gets confused and then very stubborn. But we're hoping over breakfast we can get him to see reason. That's very common, Carla assured her. We'll be ready on our end. Just fax over the signed documents as soon as you have them, and we'll update his file. While she spoke, I stared at the pattern in the tablecloth. Little blue flowers Lena had picked out years ago. The phone sat right in the middle, like a stone on a grave. They were talking about moving me like cargo. They were practicing what they'd say about me when I wasn't in the room anymore. Megan dabbed at her eyes with a napkin that stayed perfectly dry. We just want him somewhere safe, she said. Hey, he's not the man he used to be. You're right about that, I thought. The man I used to be would have given you the benefit of the doubt. Kyle cleared his throat again. We'll take care of the house paperwork this morning right after we eat, he added. Our advisor Darren said once that's settled, everything else falls into place. I filed the timeline away: breakfast, signatures, fax, drugs, van, goodbye. Carla wrapped up the call with more soothing phrases and a promise that Meadowview will be his new home. When she hung up, the kitchen felt too quiet. So, Kyle said, turning the phone face down and sliding the reverse mortgage packet toward me again. No more delays, Dad. We eat, we sign, we move forward. I blinked slowly. What day is it? I asked. He frowned. Thursday. Is it? I looked genuinely puzzled. I thought Lena's bridge game was tonight. Lena's been dead 3 years. I let the mistake hang there. Megan shot Kyle a look that said, see, he's worse than we told them. Kyle softened his tone like he was humoring a child. Mom's been gone a while, Dad, he said. That's why you need real help. Why we're doing this? Just trust me? A trust, another word emptied of meaning. Inside my mind was ticking like the old wall clock, counting seconds. 4 p.m. van. Power of attorney needed before fax. Darren waiting on signatures. Rex waiting on cash. Outside. I hunched my shoulders and rubbed my temples. What was her name? I asked. Ooze, Megan snapped. The lady on the phone, I said. From that place. Mr. Grant, she said with exaggerated patience. Her name is Carla, and the place is Meadowview. We've told you this? Meadow. I trailed off. Right, I keep forgetting. Kyle leaned over the table, placing a hand on the papers. You don't have to remember all the details, he said. That's the point, Dad. I'll handle them. You just sign, and we'll make sure you're comfortable. I looked at his hand on the paperwork. The same hand that had hit me. He saw me looking and misread it as hesitation rather than calculation. We're not the enemy here, he said. We're your family. We're doing what's best for you. I forced my mouth into something like a tired smile. I know, I whispered. I'm just tired. Can I lie down again before we do all that? Megan exchanged a quick glance with Kyle and shrugged. Fine, she said. Go rest for a bit, but don't take too long. We have a schedule today. Kyle stood and guided me back down the hallway, his hand on my elbow too tight to be called gentle. He closed my bedroom door and, out of habit, turned the key in the lock from the outside. The second his footsteps faded, I went to the closet. The brass key was where I'd left it. I slipped it into the lock, turned it without opening the door, then walked to the far corner of the room, to the old storage box shoved under the window. It was a plain cardboard thing, the word, Lun, written on the side in her careful printing. Inside were recipe cards, some costume jewelry, a stack of photos, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, an old prepaid flip phone. I'd bought it years ago for emergencies on the road. The battery was supposed to be dead by now, but I pressed the power button anyway. The little screen flickered, then glowed a weak blue. Still with me, old friend, I muttered. I scrolled through the contacts. Most names meant nothing anymore, faces long gone or moved away. But one made me stop. Frank Diner. I hit call. It rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. Hello? Frank, I said. It's Ethan. Ethan? He sounded more awake already. This better be about free pie. I took a breath and felt my jaw ache. It's about my son trying to sell my house and dump me in a home by dinner, I said. There was a pause on the line. Then the rustle of bedsheets and the thump of feet hitting a floor. Stay put, Frank said, his voice suddenly sharp as a knife. Don't sign a thing. I'm on my way. I scrolled down. Earlier messages showed Kyle whining about pressure from someone named Rex and Darren assuring him this was the cleanest way out. Because Dad won't know what's happening anyway. My hand tightened on the mouse. I clicked on the search bar and typed Rex. A new set of messages appeared, these not nearly as polished. Time's up, genius. One read. I don't care if crypto went down. 50K is 50K. I'm done listening to excuses about market dips. I want cash. You got a week, then we start collecting in pieces. Fingers, kneecaps, whatever fits. Another one from yesterday, last warning. Pay something by Friday, or we come have a friendly chat at your old man's place. Might be easier to make him understand the stakes. I leaned back in the chair, my jaw clenched. My son hadn't just fallen behind on a car payment. He'd crawled into bed with the kind of people I used to throw out of the diner at closing time. You didn't just fall in with bad company, son, I whispered. You invited them for coffee in my kitchen. There were more. Draft emails to someone at Meadowview senior residence, never quite sent but saved in a folder. I opened one and read my own life reduced to a few cold lines. Patient is confused and unsafe. Kyle had typed. Leave stove on. Has become verbally abusive, doesn't recognize family at times. Requesting expedited admission for his safety. Financials will be covered by reverse mortgage currently in process with my advisor. Confused and unsafe. That's what he'd told strangers about the man who taught him to ride a bike in the parking lot behind the diner. My mouth tasted like metal again. And this time it wasn't from the blood. I closed the draft and looked around the little room, trying to steady myself. On a shelf above the desk was the old tablet Kyle used to watch games on. The thing had gathered dust since he bought the newer laptop, but I knew it still worked. An idea came, simple and clean. I picked it up and pressed the power button. It blinked awake. His account was still logged in, he'd never bothered to log out. I opened the email app and, working slowly so my old fingers didn't slip, forwarded Darren's thread, Rex's threats, and the Meadowview drafts to an address I hadn't touched in years. It was an old email I'd made when the diner first got a website, under a silly nickname Kyle had picked for me, Grillking It. Hardly anyone knew it existed. Certainly not him. I typed the address carefully, double-checked it the way I used to check meat temperatures, and hit send. Little arrows spun for a second, then disappeared. Copies out of his reach. Still, printed paper feels more real to me than pixels. I slid open the desk drawer. There was a ream of paper and, thank God, a printer cable already plugged in. I printed the worst of it. The email where Darren said, "We get the old man to sign your liquid." The message where Rex threatened to come to my house. And the Meadowview draft describing me like I was a rabid dog. The printer sounded deafening in the small room. Each sheet that slid out felt like evidence in a trial I'd never imagined being part of. I folded the pages and tucked them inside the pocket of my robe, smoothing the fabric down over the bulge. As I closed the drawer, something on the screen caught my eye, a little icon labeled, Home Secure. I frowned. Kyle had bragged a few months back about installing cameras round the place. I'd nodded, thinking of porch pirates and bored teenagers egging houses. I hadn't realized he meant inside, too. I double-clicked the icon. A small window popped up with a list of cameras: front door, driveway, living room. I clicked living room. There I was on the screen, a few minutes younger, sitting with my coffee at the table. The picture jumped as Kyle came into frame, envelope in hand. I watched the whole scene again from the ceiling's point of view: the argument, the flash of his arm, my body crumpling to the floor. Megan stepped in, phone up. Mouth already forming the narrative. Only this angle didn't care about her story. It just showed what happened. At the bottom of the window there was a button that said, Download clip. My hand hovered over the mouse, then pressed. The file landed in a folder. I opened the tablet's browser, attached the clip to an email address to that old Grillking It account, and sent it off into the ether. If Kyle wanted to play editor for the courts. I had just secured myself the director's cut. I shut the program down and dimmed the screen until the room went almost dark. That's when I heard it, a soft creak in the hallway, the unmistakable complaint of the third floorboard outside the bathroom. I'd spent 20 years telling Lena to remind me to fix it. Now I was grateful I never had. Someone was awake. I closed the laptop with slow, careful hands, the way you lower a full pan of hot oil. The room went black except for the line of light at the bottom of the door. I moved to it and pressed my ear against the wood. Footsteps. Light ones. Megan's. Her shadow slid past the crack, then stopped. The doorknob rattled once. I held my breath. She tried it again. Locked, thanks to Kyle's own precautions. I heard her exhale, a little huff of satisfaction. Still sleeping, she whispered to herself. Good. Her steps moved on toward my bedroom. I tensed. The knob turned there, too, then stopped. Another satisfied sigh, then the faint sound of a faucet in the kitchen. I slipped out of Kyle's office, closing the door as gently as I'd opened it. Pressing my back to the hallway wall, I waited until she padded back past me, the smell of her floral night cream drifting in the dark. She never turned her head. She checked the front lock, then disappeared into the master bedroom she shared with my son. The door clicked shut. Silence settled again. She was sure I was trapped. Good. Let's keep it that way for one more night. By the time Frank knocked on the back door, the sky over the maple trees had just begun to lighten from black to a tired gray. The porch light was off. I'd slipped down the back stairs in my socks to wait, heart pounding in a slow, Steady rhythm instead of the frantic flutter it had been yesterday. 3 soft knocks. Our old signal from closing time at the diner when he wanted a refill without embarrassing his diet. I cracked the door and there he was, in a faded flannel shirt and jeans, his badge clipped to his belt but hidden under the hem. His hair had gone more gray since I last saw him at the grocery store, but his eyes were exactly the same. Keen, kind, and right now hard as marbles. "Jesus, Ethan," he breathed when he saw my face. He did that. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Before I could answer, his big arms were around me in a brief, fierce hug that knocked the air out of me for a second. "You all right?" he asked, pulling back to look at the bruise. "I've been worse," I said, "but not by my own blood." He grunted, a sound somewhere between agreement and pure fury. "Kitchen?" he asked. I nodded, and we padded in together. The house felt like a stage set before a play. Everything in its place. Too quiet. Upstairs, I could just make out the low rumble of Kyle's snore through the vents and the soft whoosh of the heating kicking on. "Sit," Frank said. "Show me." I laid the folded pages I'd tucked in my robe pocket onto the table. Darren's cheerful emails, Rex's threats, the draft to Meadowview calling me confused and unsafe. Then I set the tablet down, pulled up the downloaded camera clip, and hit play. Frank watched the whole thing, jaw tightening so much I could see the muscle jump. When Kyle's hand connected with my face, Frank's own hand curled into a fist. By the time Megan's voice floated into frame, rehearsing her lies, the knuckles were white. When the video ended, he stayed still for a moment, staring at the frozen image of me on the floor. "I ate pie in that diner of yours 3 nights a week for 15 years, he said quietly. "You slipped me coffee for free when I couldn't afford it before payday. You gave half our rookies a place to sit where they weren't getting screamed at. You think I'm going to watch your own kid throw you in the trash?" Emotion rose in my throat then, sudden and thick. I swallowed it down. "I don't want revenge, Frank," I said. "I want to be safe. And I want him stopped before he tries this on somebody else." He nodded once, all cop now. "This is elder abuse and attempted fraud," he said, tapping the papers. "Probably conspiracy to commit a few other things. But we both know how these cases go if it's just a bruise and a visced," he said. "Judges like clean evidence. We've got a good start, but we need him talking, on tape, in his own words, about what he's planning." I gestured at the emails. "Isn't this enough?" "It's good," he admitted. "Darren's going to sweat when he sees his name on a warrant, and your friend Rex is going to have some new people asking about his collection methods. But for your son, the more he spells out how he was going to sedate you and sell your house, the better. Arrogant people love to talk. We're going to let him." He pulled his phone out and scrolled, then hit a contact. "Who are you calling?" I asked. "Somebody who scares me more than any judge," he said with a faint smile. "Our new queen of legal aid." A woman's brisk voice answered on the second ring. "Sing. Morning, Priya. It's Frank," he said. "Sorry to wake you. I've got a situation with Ethan Grant. You remember Ethan, the diner guy? Best blueberry pie in the county," she said. "What's wrong?" He put the call on speaker and set the phone on the table. "I'll let him tell you," he said. I took a breath and summarized it all as simply as I could: the reverse mortgage documents, the Meadowview call, the talk of sedatives, the slap, the video, the way they'd planned to have me out of my house by dinner. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a pause, then a slow exhale. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grant," she said. "But I'm glad you called. Here's the good news: legally, your son doesn't have anything yet. Those papers he shoved at you, they're drafts. A power of attorney only means something if you sign it, and right now, you haven't." "Meadowview?" I asked. "They're operating on lies and assumptions," she said. "No judge has declared you incompetent. You're on this call, and you're making more sense than half the clients in my docket. Any contract based on false medical claims is vulnerable. A judge can issue an emergency order today to bar any transfer until things are investigated." I let that sink in. For the first time since Kyle had dropped that envelope, the tight band around my chest loosened a notch. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We'll build the case," Frank said. "We'll let him show his hand. You said he wants you to sign at breakfast." "7, I said. "He likes routines." When he's the one in control. Perfect, Singh replied. Here's my suggestion. Ethan, you act like you've given up. Let him think you're ready to sign. When he starts talking about his plans, how the money will bail him out, how the home will take care of you, don't argue. Ask little questions. What happens to the house once I'm there? How much do you owe Rex? Let him brag. Let him hang himself with his own words. And you? I asked. I'll get an emergency petition drafted and send it to Judge Morales, she said. He owes me 3 favors. The second Frank sends me the audio, I'll hit send. If we're lucky, we'll have a protective order and a freeze on your property before that transport van leaves their parking lot. Frank was already nodding. I'll be outside, he said. We crack a window in the dining room. I can catch everything on my recorder. If he gets physical again, I'm through that door before he finishes the swing. I looked down at my hands. They were old hands. Scarred from hot pans, knuckles big from arthritis, but steady now. He wants me to sit and eat what he serves, I said slowly. Tomorrow, I'll serve him something he won't be able to swallow. Singh chuckled softly on the line. I like this one, she said to Frank. He's got more backbone than half my hotshot clients. Ethan, are you sure you're up for this? It's not easy, letting someone lie to your face when you know the truth. It's all I've been doing for years, I said. At least this time, the lie will be useful. We moved quickly after that. Frank checked the windows, found the best spot where sound carried from the table without being obvious. We agreed on a signal. If I felt things getting out of hand, I'd say Lena's full name, not just Len. He'd come in then, orders or not. Singh emailed me a simple list of questions to keep in mind. Things that sounded like a confused old man seeking reassurance but were really legal landmines. Remember, she said, the more confident he sounds, the better for you. Let him believe he's already won. The eastern sky outside the kitchen window was turning pink when Frank finally shrugged his jacket back on. I'll park 2 streets over, he said. No need to spook them with the cruiser. I'll be in your backyard by 6:45. Crack that dining room window just before you call them to the table. He squeezed my shoulder once firm. Ethan, he added, no matter how ugly he gets, remember you are not begging him for mercy. He is begging a judge for leniency. Big difference. I nodded. After he slipped out the back, I stood alone in the kitchen. The counter still held last night's dirty mug. The envelope Kyle had slammed down sat where I'd left it, edges curling, threat still humming in the air. Outside, a bird tried a tentative chirp, then another. Morning, whether I wanted it or not. I went to the dining room and eased the window open 2 inches. Cool air slipped in, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and car exhaust. I reached under the table where my chair sat and taped my own old cassette recorder to the underside of the wood, thumb on the red button. I've cooked a lot of breakfasts in my life, I murmured to the empty room. This one might be the most important. Then I straightened the chairs, smoothed the tablecloth, and headed for the stove. It was time to get the pans hot. Cooking breakfast that morning felt like loading a gun I hoped I'd never have to fire. I stood in my kitchen, the same square of linoleum I'd paced for decades, and reached for the cast iron skillet that had been with me since the diner days. Its handle fit my palm like an old friend. I set it on the front burner and turned the gas up just enough to hear that gentle whoosh. Blue flames licked the black metal. From the fridge I pulled the good stuff. Thick-cut bacon from the butcher, the kind Kyle always begged for when he was a kid. Back then, I'd act gruff about it. But I'd slide an extra strip onto his plate when he wasn't looking. Beside it, a carton of eggs, brown-shelled and heavy. I lined everything up on the counter like soldiers before inspection. The house was quiet. Megan and Kyle were still upstairs, sleeping off their victory drinks, blissfully unaware that their script had been rewritten overnight. I laid the bacon into the cold pan and listened to the first hiss as the fat met hot iron. The smell rose up almost immediately, smoky and rich, wrapping itself around my memories. Sunday mornings in the diner, Kyle in his pajamas at the back booth, swinging his legs and asking if he could have one more, Dad. Please. Mouth shiny with grace. I'd given him the last piece more times than I should have. While the bacon crisped, I slid 2 more pans onto the stove. One for eggs, one for toast. None of this pressed button toaster nonsense. I like bread toasted in a pan with butter, edges going dark, middle still soft. On the counter lay the envelope Kyle had slammed down yesterday. I took the reverse mortgage packet out and smoothed it on the table. The signature line at the bottom stared up at me like a dare. I placed it on the plate that would sit at the head of the table, his new favorite seat, and set a pen across it as carefully as if I were garnishing a dish. Steam fogged the kitchen window. I wiped it with the back of my wrist and squinted out toward the hedge. A dark shape shifted there, Frank keeping low, pretending to be part of the shrubbery. My old eyes weren't great, but I could make out the angle of his cap, the faint glow of his phone screen. A buzz in my pocket made me jump. I wiped my hand on a towel and pulled out the flip phone. Text from Frank Judge is on standby. Make him brag. I smiled despite myself and tucked the phone away. The recorder under the table clicked once when I pressed the red button with my thumb. A tiny wheel began to spin, barely audible over the crackle of bacon. I checked that the dining room window was open a sliver, just enough for sound to escape but not enough for Megan to notice a draft and start fussing. Next, I dug out Lena's favorite tablecloth from the drawer. White cotton with little faded blue flowers marching along the edge. She used to spread it once a year at Thanksgiving, smoothing down each wrinkle, telling me it made the place look fancy, even if the plates were chipped. I spread it over the table now, taking my time. The corners lined up. The pattern sat straight. Then I went to the cabinet where we keep the nice dishes, the ones that hardly see daylight anymore. 2 plates with barely a crack, one slightly more worn for me. Matching mugs. The good silverware with the little swirl at the handle. I set Kyle's place at the head of the table, plate, fork, knife, spoon, all lined up like a magazine photo. On top of the plate, I laid the stack of forms, squared to the edges, pen gleaming across them. Megan's setting went to his right, mine to the side where I could see both their faces. As I moved around the table, I passed the framed photo that always sits on the corner hutch. Lena in her apron, hair pulled back, laughing at something out of frame, one arm wrapped around a much smaller Kyle who was clutching a milkshake like it was gold. I picked the frame up and brushed a thumb across the glass. You always said if someone wants the last piece of pie, let them work for it. I murmured. You were right. We just never made him work for anything. Her eyes, caught forever in that moment, looked like they were about to say something back. But glass doesn't talk. Houses do. And right now the house was telling me we were almost out of time. The bacon was ready. I pulled it from the skillet onto a paper towel-lined plate, the strips curling as they cooled. In another pan I slid slices of bread into melted butter, listening to them sizzle. I cracked eggs into a bowl, yolks like little suns, and whisked them with a pinch of salt and pepper. As I poured the eggs into the pan, they spread, then began to set at the edges, soft and glossy. Kyle liked them with the yolks still a bit runny. I made them that way out of habit even now. Old cook's muscle memory. I caught myself humming under my breath, a song from the jukebox we used to play cleaning up after closing. I stopped, startled, then let it come back. If there was ever a morning I needed to feel like the man who ran a kitchen, it was this one. Between flips, I ran through my lines in my head, like an actor before curtain. So, how much do you owe Rex? Again, I'd ask casually as if making small talk. And Meadowview takes me today no matter what I say. I'd say feigning worry, prompting Kyle to brag about his authority. And once I'm there, the house, what happens to it? I'd mumble, letting the question trail off. Every answer, every arrogant quip about liquidity, anquity, would go straight onto the tape and out through the window to Frank's mic. I plated the eggs, the bacon, the toast, arranging everything with more care than it needed. My own plate got less food. Old habits again. Feed others first. The clock over the stove ticked louder in my ears than it ever had. 10 to 7. I poured coffee into 3 mugs. 2 full strength, 1 decaf for me. Not that I trusted what Megan might have planned, but I'd brewed these myself, from beans I'd kept hidden in the back of the pantry. Before I called them down, I took a last look around. The forms on the plate. The pen. The sunlight just beginning to edge over the sink, turning the steam into ghosts. The tiny gap in the window. The recorder's faint wear under my fingertips. Everything in place. I went back to Lena's picture, set my fingers on the frame. I'm sorry it came to this, I told her quietly. We let him slide too long. I let your soft heart talk mine out of being firm. This is the bill for all those just this once favors. I kissed my fingertips and tapped the glass over her face. Then I straightened, wiping my hands on an old apron with Grant's Diner faded across the front. I slipped it over my head, tied the strings around my waist. The weight of it settled across my chest like armor. The house, which had been holding its breath, began to stir. A toilet flushed upstairs, a door banged open. Heavy, careless footsteps thudded across the floorboards, the sound of a man who had never once tried to move quietly in someone else's home. Kyle. Megan's lighter tread followed, a few beats behind. I checked my reflection in the microwave door. Bruise blooming on my cheek, lips still a little swollen, eyes clearer than they'd been in years. I forced my mouth into a small, neutral line. Not a smile, not a scowl. Just a tired father making breakfast. I turned off the burners, stepped to the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, and took a slow breath. He'll smell bacon and think he's won, I thought, listening to his footsteps on the stairs. He has no idea what's really on the menu. There's a special kind of arrogance in the way a man sits in another man's chair and tells him where he'll die. Kyle came down the stairs with that swagger I'd watched grow. From a kid's bounce into a bully's strut. He hit the bottom step, sniffed, and followed the smell of bacon like it was a victory banner. "Wow," he said, stepping into the dining room. "Look at this." I stood by the doorway in my old apron, hands folded. The table gleamed with Lena's good plates, the silverware catching the morning light. The stack of papers sat squarely on the plate at the head of the table, pen shining across the top. Kyle's eyes went straight to the documents, then to my face. A slow, ugly grin spread across his. "See," he said, dropping into my old seat like he'd been born there. "You know your place now." He leaned back, legs wide, one arm draped over the chair back. King of the two-bedroom castle. Megan slipped in behind him a moment later, dressed already in tight jeans and a soft sweater that looked new. She glanced around, taking in the cloth, the china, the silver. Her fingers brushed the handle of her knife as if weighing it. Then she sat on Kyle's right, back straight, eyes a little too bright. "Smells nice," she said. "Somebody was busy." "Had to keep my hands occupied," I replied, carrying in the platter of bacon and setting it down within Kyle's easy reach. Old habits. I moved in and out of the kitchen like I had 1,000 mornings, plates in hand. Eggs sliding onto porcelain, toast fanned out, steam curling up. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. Every time I set a dish down, I heard the faint whir of the recorder under the table and imagined the sound waves drifting through the cracked window to where Frank crouched in the hedge. Kyle grabbed a strip of bacon and bit into it before anyone else even had a fork. "Now this is more like it," he said around the mouthful. "You cook, you rest, and I'll actually handle grown-up stuff." "I appreciate you taking charge, son," I said, easing into my chair. "Maybe you can walk me through your plan again. For today. Old head likes to hear things twice." He smirked, chewing. "Fine," he said. "Eat while you listen." He shoveled some eggs onto his plate, drowning them in ketchup the way he had when he was 8. Some things, apparently, never changed. "So," he began, waving his fork like a pointer. "Step 1, you sign those." He nodded at the papers. "Hundaran files the reverse mortgage. House becomes collateral, bank cuts a nice check. That takes care of Rex and his bat-swinging buddies." Megan made a face. "I'll be glad when that gorilla stops calling," she muttered. "I hate seeing Rex pop up on your phone." "You and me both," Kyle said lightly, but there was a tightness around his eyes. "Once he gets his cut, we still have plenty left. That's our start, fresh money. New place, maybe out by the lake. No creaky floors, no old man wallpaper." He glanced pointedly at Lena's faded flowers on the tablecloth. "And me?" I asked, cutting my toast, letting my voice tremble just enough. "What happens to me in this start fresh plan?" "That's step 2, he said. "Meadowview. Van comes at 4, takes you to your new home. By supper, you're their problem, not mine." Megan picked up her fork, poked at her eggs, but didn't eat. "Stop making it sound so harsh," she said. "It's not a prison, Ethan. They have activities, crafts, staff who know what they're doing." "Do they?" I asked quietly. "Do they know I like my eggs over easy?" She rolled her eyes. They know how to keep you from leaving the stove on and wandering into traffic. That's the important part. Kyle chuckled. If he gives them the same lip he gives us, they might up the meds, he said. Maybe we should give him a head start. Put a little something in his orange juice to smooth the transition. Like that woman said. He laughed at his own joke, shoving more bacon into his mouth. My stomach twisted, but my face stayed blank. So this reverse mortgage, I said, wiping my mouth with my napkin, that's all for Rex. Mostly. He shrugged. 50 grand to get him off my back, some to clear the cards, some for first and last month on a decent place. The bank doesn't care what we do with it as long as the house is good collateral. It's our equity, Dad. Sitting here doing nothing. Time you acted your age and let it work for the family. Our equity. Megan echoed, eyes flicking to the window for a second, then back to the silverware. And we have to clear out all this junk once you're gone. I'm not living with doilies and rooster salt shakers. You could throw it all on the lawn and light a match for all I care, Kyle said. Once his name is on those Meadowview forms, this place might as well have a for sale sign on it. I took a deliberate sip of coffee. What if I say no at the last minute? I asked, making my voice small. What if that van pulls up and I decide I don't want to go? Kyle snorted. Your no doesn't matter, he said. That's the point of these. He tapped the packet with his greasy finger. Paper says I decide. That's what boss means. McGann nodded briskly. Would just tell them you're confused and frightened. They're used to that. They'd bring you anyway. I let silence sit for a moment, hearing my own pulse in my ears and imagining Frank's recorder getting every careless word. So if I drop dead today, I said slowly. If I just keeled over right here at this table, what then? Kyle barely paused to think. Dead, drugged, or drooling, he said, shrugging. It all comes to me either way. Eventually, this just speeds things up and keeps you comfortable. You should be thanking me. You get 3 meals a day, I get the roof. Fair trade. Megan finally took a bite of toast, chewed, then sighed dramatically. Just sign so we don't have to drag you out in front of the neighbors, she said. You know how people talk on this street. I glanced toward the window. Mrs. Klein across the way walked her little dog at 7 on the dot every morning. She'd already seen the patrol car when Frank came by once last year for coffee. If she saw a van hauling me out, she'd know. You really think the neighbors aren't already watching? I murmured. Kyle slapped his palm on the table, making the silverware jump. Nuff, he said sharply. I'm not arguing with you about this all morning. You owe me this after all the chances you've blown. We're doing it my way now. He grabbed the papers, flipped to the last page, and clicked the pen open with his thumb. The sound was like a little gunshot in the quiet room. Here, he said, thrusting the pen at me, tip first. Enough talk. Sen. I looked at the pen. My name sat on the line below it, printed neat as you please. I took it between my fingers, feeling its cheap plastic, the tiny ridge where the cap snapped on. For a second, I let my hand tremble the same way it had on the floor yesterday. Then, just as the point of the pen kissed the paper, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a hard, insistent buzz that echoed down the hallway and made the plates on the sideboard rattle. Kyle jerked his head toward the sound, scowling. Who the hell is that? He snapped. At 7 in the damn morning. Megan's eyes darted from the door to me, alarm sparking there for the first time. I set the pen down carefully on top of the packet, aligning it with the edge of the page. Then I met my son's eyes, the same color as Lena's but colder than I'd ever seen them, and let a thin, wry smile tug at the corner of my mouth. The only boss in this town I still answer to, I said. The bell buzzed again, longer this time, then a heavy fist thudded against the door. Kyle pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the floor. If that's some salesman, I swear, he muttered, stomping down the hallway. Megan stayed frozen in her seat, fingers wide-knuckled around her fork. Her eyes flicked from the papers to me, to the open window. She smelled something coming. She just didn't know what yet. I rose slower, wiping my hands on my apron, and followed my son at a distance. From the doorway, I watched him yank the front door open with all the entitled irritation of a man who thinks the house and everyone in it belong to him. Can I help? He cut off mid-sentence. On the porch stood Frank, no longer hiding in hedges. He wore his full uniform now, dark blue, neat and pressed, badge gleaming on his chest. On either side of him loomed two younger officers, hands resting near their holsters. Behind them, in a sensible suit and flat shoes, stood Attorney Singh, a thick folder tucked under her arm. "Morning, Kyle," Frank said, voice mild. "We're here to see your dad." Kyle blinked, mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Officer. Sergeant. What's going on?" he stammered. "If this is about the noise yesterday, it was just a misunderstanding. My father's not well. We were just arranging help." Frank's eyes slid past him and found me in the hallway. "Morning, Ethan," he said like we were back at the diner. "Smells like you've still got the touch." I nodded. "Food's on the table," I said. "Come on in." He stepped across the threshold without waiting for an invitation. The two officers followed, filling the little foyer with leather and authority. Singh came last, closing the door gently behind her. Kyle spun, his face blotching red. "Dad, what did you do?" he hissed under his breath. "Invited some guests," I replied, walking past him toward the dining room. "Sit down, son. You ought to hear this too." Back in the dining room, Megan had half risen from her chair, then frozen when the uniforms appeared. She sat back down a little too quickly. "Good morning," Singh said pleasantly, setting her folder on the table opposite Kyle's plate. "Mr. Grant. Mrs. Grant. Grant Jr. It's Megan." Megan snapped automatically. Then she caught herself. "I mean, hi. What is this?" Frank remained standing by the doorway, one hand on the back of my chair. The two officers flanked the entrance. Neither looked at the food, their eyes did slow sweeps of the room, cataloging exits, hands, faces. Kyle tried to pull himself together. He straightened his shoulders, giving them his best business smile. "Look, officers, I think there's been a miscommunication," he began. "My father's been declining. We were just on the phone with a care facility. We're trying to do the right thing. Aren't we, Dad?" He shot me a look like a cue. I eased into my seat, the recorder humming unseen beneath my fingers. "I've certainly heard some interesting plans this morning," I said. "Ms. Singh, would you like some coffee?" She smiled faintly. "No, thank you. I've already had 3 cups. She opened the folder and drew out a stapled set of papers. "What I would like is to make sure everyone in this room understands why we're here." Kyle bristled. "Excuse me, who are you?" "I'm attorney Priya Singh with the County Legal Aid Clinic," she said. "Your father and I spoke earlier. I specialize in elder law and financial abuse cases." "Abuse?" Megan repeated, a high little laugh escaping her. "We're the ones taking care of him." "You don't get to call stealing a man's house helping him," Singh replied, tone still calm. She slid the top document toward me. "Mr. Grant, this is the emergency protective order Judge Morales signed 10 minutes ago. It states that you cannot be moved from this property or medicated for transport without your explicit consent and an independent evaluation." O'Kyle snatched the paper up, eyes flicking over the legalese. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "On what grounds?" "On these," Frank said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small device, and set it next to my plate. "And whatever he's got under the table there." I slid my hand beneath the edge of the tablecloth and retrieved my old cassette recorder, setting it beside Frank's. 2 little boxes between the eggs and the forms. Kyle blanched. "You bugged us," he demanded. "You bugged yourself," Frank said. "Funny, Kyle. On tape, you sound pretty clear about who you wanted in charge, and it wasn't him." Singh nodded toward the devices. "May we listen, Mr. Grant?" "By all means," I said. Frank hit play on his. The room filled with our voices from just minutes earlier. Kyle bragging about paying off Rex, talking about or equity, and by supper he'll be their problem, not mine. Megan griping about clearing out my junk. Kyle laughing about slipping something into my juice. The line that had lodged in my gut like a nail. "Your no doesn't matter. Paper says I decide." That's what boss means. The words sounded uglier in the calm light of retrospection than they had over hot eggs. Hearing them from the outside made my own skin crawl. Megan's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes darted to the window, the recorder, the officers' faces. That's out of context," she stammered. "We were under stress. He doesn't mean." "Save it," Frank said quietly. Judge Morales is on the other end of this. He tapped his body cam. He heard the whole breakfast live. Kyle's bravado crumpled at the edges. You can't use that, he said. We were in our home. That's illegal, right? Dad, tell them you didn't authorize this. You don't even know how to use that thing. I looked at him steadily. I know how to press record, I said. I've been listening to you my whole life. Singh pulled out another stack of papers. These, she said, fanning them out, are printouts of email correspondence between you and a Mr. Darren Pike. He appears to be some kind of questionable broker. In them, he encourages you to get the old man to sign a reverse mortgage so you can be liquid by next week. There are also messages to someone named Rex threatening physical harm if you don't pay gambling debts. And here, she held up a draft, is your description of your father as confused and unsafe to Meadowview, a facility that had already scheduled a van for today at 4 p.m. Kyle's face went from red to chalk white. How did you get those? He whispered. I patted my robe pocket. You'd be amazed what a retired cook can figure out when his back's against the wall. Megan found her voice. You broke into his computer, she cried. Isn't that some kind of crime? Frank raised an eyebrow. You mean his laptop sitting in his house on his desk under his roof? He asked. With his name on half the accounts. No, Ma. What's a crime is using lies and forged paperwork to take that roof out from over his head. Singh shuffled another document to the top. Mr. Kyle Grant, she said, formal now. On behalf of the county and at the request of Mr. Ethan Grant, there is an active investigation into attempted financial exploitation and elder abuse. Based on the recordings and documents we already have, we have more than enough probable cause to proceed. Kyle lurched to his feet, chair toppling backward. This is insane, he shouted. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's doing. We were trying to keep him safe. Ask him. Dad, tell them you're not thinking straight. Tell them. Sit down, sir, one of the young officers said, stepping forward. Kyle ignored him, rounding the table toward me. You can't do this, he pleaded, voice cracking. Dad, come on, you know Rex. If I don't pay him, he'll kill me. You want that on your conscience. You want to watch them zip me up in a bag because you wouldn't sign a form. Something twisted in my chest then. For a moment, I saw the boy who'd once clung to my leg at the county fair, afraid of getting lost in the crowd. Then the vision flickered, replaced by the man who had raised his hand against me and laughed about drugging me for a smooth transition. You put yourself in Rex's pocket, I said quietly. I didn't deal those cards. Frank stepped between us, one hand on Kyle's chest without needing to push. Mr. Grant Jr., he said, formal now. You are under arrest for attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, making false statements to a care facility, and conspiracy to defraud. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest, for your sake, that you use it. He nodded to the officers. They moved in with practiced efficiency, spinning Kyle around and snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. The metallic click echoed off the walls, sharp and final. Megan backed up until she hit the china cabinet. This is crazy, she whispered. You can't arrest him. He's my husband. He was just trying to manage things. Singh looked at her evenly. You signed some of those Meadowview documents as well, she said. We'll be looking very closely at your role. For now, you may want to contact a lawyer of your own. One officer moved to stand near her, not touching her yet, but making it clear she wasn't going anywhere. Kyle twisted in the cuffs, eyes wide with a mix of fear and fury. Dad, he cried as they turned him toward the hall. Tell them to stop! Fix this like you always do. Pay Rex off. I'll go to meetings. I'll change. Just don't let them take me. I'll end up dead in an alley. He tried to step toward me, but the officers held him fast. Spit flew from his mouth as he spoke. Please, he begged, voice breaking down to something raw and high. You're my father. You can't let them do this to me. I looked past him to the hutch where Lena's photo stood watching the scene. Her smile frozen from another lifetime, arm around a boy who had no idea yet how heavy other people's money could feel. Bosses don't need to lie and drug their fathers. I said more to myself than to him. They look people in the eye and sign their own name. He stared at me, blinking as if trying to understand words in a language he'd never learned. Frank guided him toward the door. The officers followed, boots heavy on the floorboards. The house shook a little as it had when he'd first come storming in, but the air felt different now, cleared like after a storm breaks. As Kyle passed the photo, his head turned. For a second, he looked at his mother's face, and something like shame flitted across his features. Then the moment was gone, swallowed by fear. At the threshold, he twisted again, eyes locking on mine. "Dad." He choked out one last time, voice hoarse. "Bail me out, please." I didn't move. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just let my gaze drift past him to Lena's picture on the wall. The check isn't due from me this time, I thought, and I let the door close behind him. People think the hardest part was watching my son in handcuffs. They're wrong. The hardest part was the next morning, when I poured myself a cup of coffee in an empty kitchen and realized, for the first time in a long time, that I was finally safe from my own child. It's been 8 months since that breakfast. The bruise on my cheek faded in a week. The paperwork took longer. Kyle's lawyer tried every angle: stress, addiction, miscommunication about care options. But a judge who has heard his share of excuses doesn't care much for a man bragging on tape about sedatives and equity. In the end, Kyle took a deal. Guilty to attempted financial exploitation and elder abuse, plus a couple of lesser fraud counts for the creative way he'd used my name with Darren and Rex. 4 years in a minimum security facility, with mandatory counseling and a ban on managing anyone's finances but his own. Parole possible in 2, if he behaves and the board believes he finally understands the word no. When the sentence was read, he looked back at me, eyes wide and wet, like a little boy lost in a crowd. I sat in the second row with Frank and Singh on either side, my hands folded. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded once, to the judge and to myself. We'd all finally stopped pretending. Megan didn't make it to trial. She folded faster than the diner's napkins once she saw the mountain of email and recordings. She cut a deal early, gave statements about Darren's schemes and Meadowview's eagerness to accept difficult patients, on the word of relatives with checkbooks. Probation, community service, a fine big enough to sting. Last I heard, she'd moved 2 towns over and was working the breakfast shift at a chain restaurant that pays in tips and sore feet. Every so often, someone brings me gossip. She looks tired, they say. The jewelry is gone. I don't feel joy when I hear that. Just a kind of balance, like a crooked picture finally set straight. Darren lost his license. Turns out, my case wasn't the first time he'd nudged a son or niece to liberate equity from some confused senior. Regulators love a pattern. Meadowview found itself under a magnifying glass too. Singh made sure every word Megan had told Carla ended up in the right inbox. The facility put me on a formal, do not admit, list and sent me a letter full of apologies and phrases like, re-evaluating intake procedures. I framed it and hung it in the bathroom. As for the house, I thought I'd never leave it. I'd spent so long fighting to keep those 4 walls upright that selling them felt like betraying Lena. But after the dust settled, I walked from room to room and realized it had become a museum of things I didn't want to remember. The groove in the floor where Kyle's chair had scraped. The dent in the wall from his fist as a teenager. The spot on the tile where my blood had dried. So I sold it, on my terms. Singh helped me find a good realtor and a better accountant. We priced it fairly, turned down a couple of flippers who smelled like Darren, and handed it over to a young couple who walked in and saw a future, not collateral. Watching them measure the nursery made the place feel alive again. I took a chunk of the proceeds, paid off the last little bits I owed, and bought myself something I'd never had in 68 years, a life scaled to me, not to other people's appetites. A small apartment on the edge of town, 3rd floor, no yard to mow, but a park across the street where old men play chess and kids scream on the swings. The kitchen is half the size of my old one, but the stove works and the rent is paid on time. That's enough. Another chunk went into something else. Are you sure? Singh asked, looking over the papers. You could just pad your own nest and be done. I've had my turn, I said. Let's see what happens if we start feeding the right mouths. We set up the Grant Trades Fund, nothing flashy. Just a small account that helps pay tuition and tools for kids who want to learn a trade, but don't have anyone to sign the forms with them. The first 3 came from Frank's beat. A boy who'd been caught tagging walls but made wicked good sketches, now apprenticing as a sign painter. A girl who'd run away from 2 foster homes and discovered she likes fixing engines more than running. A quiet kid who'd been stealing sandwiches and now washes dishes at a restaurant that might someday be his. On Tuesday nights, I sit in on their classes sometimes at the community college shop. I watch them struggle with welds and wiring diagrams, faces scrunched in concentration, and I feel something I hadn't in a long time: hope. I still visit Kyle. Not often. Maybe once every couple of months. The first time I walked into that visitor's room, the plastic chairs, the scratched tables, the faint smell of disinfectant and boredom, I almost turned around. Then I remembered the way he'd looked at me over the papers, certain he owned my future, and I kept walking. He's different there. Smaller. Some of the swagger has been scrubbed off by gray jumpsuits and mandatory chores. The first visit, he spent an hour alternating between blame and begging. "If you just signed, none of this would have happened," he said one minute. "Dad, I'm sorry, I was scared," he said the next. "You know what Rex is like. You left me no choice." "I left you no choice but not to steal from me," I answered. "You made the rest on your own." He still asks about money sometimes. Early on it was, "Can you get me a better lawyer?" Lately it's, "Can you send something to my account so I can buy snacks?" I send a few dollars now and then. Enough for toothpaste, not enough for debts. I won't pay Rex, I told him, the last time he asked. If he's smart, he'll cut his losses. If he's not, well, you chose your company. He looked at me then the way a drowning man looks at the shore, angry that it's not closer. "You're really just going to let me rot in here?" he asked. "I'm going to let you serve your sentence," I said. "You owe it." "Who?" he demanded. "The court." "You? Yourself?" I said. "And your mother. Be grateful she didn't live to see this." Sometimes, when I leave, I sit in the car and let the sadness wash over me. A part of me will probably always hear his little boy laugh in that grown man's voice. But I don't turn the key toward the bank anymore. I turn it toward my own front door. People say money rots people. It doesn't. It just shows you what was already inside. I spent years rescuing Kyle from himself and called it love. All I taught him was that he'd never have to stand on his own feet, because Dad would always be there with a check and an excuse. Real love, especially when you're old, sometimes means saying, "I won't let you use my life to ruin yours." I sit at my small kitchen table now, in my little apartment, watch the sun hit the leaves in the park, and drink coffee that tastes better than the expensive stuff Kyle used to order on my card. It tastes like quiet. Like my own company. Like safety. If you've listened this far, maybe you've seen a bit of your own life in mine. Maybe you've got a child or a niece or a nephew who thinks your years of work are just waiting to be harvested. Maybe someone has treated you like an ATM because you've got gray in your hair. So let me ask you this. If your own kid raised a hand to you and tried to steal your home, would you bail them out? Or would you let a judge do what judges do? And be honest. Has anyone ever tried to control your money, your house, or your choices just because you're getting older? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. There's someone out there who needs to hear how you handled it. If my story meant something to you, if you believe elders deserve respect and the right to say no, hit that like button to push this video in front of more people who might need it. Subscribe to Dad Revenge Tales for more stories where calm wisdom and quiet justice win over greed. And before you go, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I spent 40 years feeding strangers at my diner. These days, it helps to know who's sitting at the other end of the table, listening.